Okay, in our next section here, we're going to continue our discussion about platform framing and focus in on the roof. Okay, we came all the way up from the ground through the foundation, the floors, the walls, and we are finally at the top. Let's get started. Before we get too caught up in the roof framing, I'd like to talk about roofs in general for a few minutes. And the first thing we want to discuss is roof forms. Roofs come, excuse me, in lots of different shapes. Here is a really common one. This is called a gable. It's got two planes that come together like this. If you take this kind of V-shaped gable and add an angle at the other ends, what you get is a hip roof. All right. A shed is kind of like half a gable, right? It's just a slope in one direction. A flat roof, pretty self-explanatory, except for the fact that flat roofs aren't actually flat, okay? They have to be sloped a very small amount in order to get the water to drain out of them, just so you know. So let's briefly talk about flat roofs. Flat roofs are very, very common in commercial work because they can efficiently cover any shape or size building. But we're talking about residential, and take a look at these pictures. You can see that flat roofs can be very, very effective for residential also. They can also be used as a roof deck or an outside space. But flat roofs require a membrane for waterproofing. Okay, you can't just have shingles, for example. You need a continuous membrane in order so that the water doesn't seep in. I already mentioned that flat roofs aren't exactly flat. The minimum recommended slope for flat roofs is a 1/4 inch, so it drops a 1/4 inch per 1 foot horizontal, or 1 in 50. Right, those are the same thing. Sloping roofs. Sloping roofs have a long history in residential construction, so for in houses. And if anybody needs reminding of what a sloped roof looks like, I got a picture right here for you. Okay. They naturally shed water, which is why they've been so popular for so very, very long. There's a couple different ways you can frame sloping roofs. And one is to use rafters, and the other is to use trusses. We're going to be talking about both of those. You can also have panel framing. It's much less common. So I'm going to stick to the rafters and the trusses. Let's learn a little roof vocabulary. You didn't know that you were in a vocabulary class, but here you are. So the top edge or peak of a roof is called a ridge. That's this line right here. It's kind of the upward pointing V. Any downward pointing joint is the valley. Here's your valley. And here is a upward pointing joint, but it's at an angle and not horizontal. Okay, so that's a hip right there. This piece of wall, this wall on the side of the house that has kind of the triangular top to it, is called the gable end of the house. So that's a gable end wall. And finally, this sloping roof right here, okay, has two different edge conditions. One's this edge right here. It is a horizontal edge, and it's called the eave right here. You can't see it in this illustration, but underneath the eave is the soffit. And finally, this edge, so the second edge condition of this sloped roof, is called a rake. You can see that the rake is the edge that's at an angle. Let's learn a couple more words. The first one is span. We've already talked about this for floors, but interestingly, for roofs, it's just slightly different. The span is not this distance from here to here. It's actually measured horizontally, okay? And so the span would be from here to here. Also, let's talk about that slope. A really common way to measure the slope of the roof is to talk about the rise, how much the roof goes up or rises, versus the run, how far it goes over. So this particular roof that we're looking at is a 4 in 12 roof, and that's how you'd read that, 4 in 12. So for every 4 inches, excuse me, let me say that the other direction. For every 12 inches of run, there's 4 inches of rise. So coming back to this overview illustration of platform framing, we have talked about the foundation, we've talked about the floor, we've talked about the walls, and now we are up here in the roof. Okay, finally we've gotten to how to frame your roof. So take a look at this illustration from your textbook. We are showing the roof rafters. That's this piece right here. Okay, just like the floor joists and the wall studs, the roof rafters will be evenly spaced. They're typically 24 inches apart. It's fairly common spacing. So here are the roof rafters. Underneath them and going horizontally are the ceiling joists or the attic joists. Up here at the top is shown a ridge board. There's two different ways to construct your gable roof, and one is with a ridge board. The other is with a ridge beam, which is a heavier structural member. Take a look at your textbook. They go into the differences between the two. Right now we're looking at the ridge board framing. And here are some rules of thumb for a rafter span. 2 by 6, 8, 10, or 12. You can span wider distances with the larger members. Here's another look at the exact same system. All right, so let's start up here. We have our ridge board. And then here are the rafter members right here. They're typically 12, 16, or 24 inches apart. 24 is pretty common. Okay. And take a look, they rest on the double top plate of the wall system below. Okay, so that's how our framing systems are tied together. Just like in our floor system, sometimes you needed to make an opening or a hole. Sometimes you need to do that in your roof. Maybe there's a chimney coming through. Maybe there's something else. Chimney is the most common. And so that's what this would look like right here. We're framing an opening within our roof system. Roofs can also be framed by trusses. Trusses are very, very common in residential construction, and often they're less expensive. Why are they less expensive? Because they're prefabricated at the factory. So there is less on-site labor. There's also less wastage of material as each individual rafter is cut. All right, so here's what trusses look like. It's a couple of vocabulary words. Here we go. This is a truss. It has a bottom chord. Here is the top chord, right here, top chord. And any of these pieces in the middle are called a web, kind of like a spider web. All right. So bottom chord, top chord, and web. And finally, just like the rafter, your truss will have a slope. Okay, rise over run. Here's what trusses will look like out in the fields. And they come prefabricated, they are shipped to the site, and then erected onto your structure there. Let's end our discussion about the roof framing system by showing how this all fits together into a whole building. I found this great illustration for you, so take a look. And it's showing how the structural forces or the load is flowing through your system and finally discharged or resting on the soil. So starting from the top right here, in this case, we're showing a roof truss. Take a look at this roof truss. This piece right here is a prefabricated piece. And any of the weight of the roof, so could be the roof members itself, could be a person standing up there, could be some snow up there, okay, is transmitted down to the walls. So take a look, the those roof trusses are resting on the top plate of the walls, right here. And here's the wall studs. We're transmitting that load or that force down. Here's the bottom plate of our wall. And here is our floor system right here. We've got the floor joists with the wood subfloor on top of it. And moving down into our foundation. So any weight that's kind of accumulating as you move down through your home is coming down into the foundation right here. And in our cutaway view, we can see that the weight is being transmitted into the swale on the bearing capacity of the swale. All right, so in this video, we learned about roofs. We've learned about roof shapes. You learned some roof vocabulary and a couple of different ways to frame roofs with rafters and with trusses.